What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So if I had to pick what I consider to be the best Samsung phone you can buy right now through the first half of 2021, I think it would absolutely be this one, the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G. Now, it may not necessarily be the best overall Android device, especially if you live outside the US, but I think it's a fantastic, well-rounded smartphone, a true bang for your buck kind of device with a lot to offer, and the kind of device that makes you think twice about spending $700, $800, $1,000 or more on a flagship. This A52 5G, I think, is also now the pinnacle of Samsung's A series, this sort of mid-range, mid-level smartphone lineup, and it's the culmination of a couple-year span now where people seem to prefer good value rather than the latest, greatest, and most expensive thing. And that's exactly what we get here, value. I've had my A52 5G for a couple of months now, and in this video, I'm going to talk about my experience with this phone, all the things it gets right, a couple critiques I have, and everything else you need to know if maybe you're considering it for yourself. So first off, I just want to quickly make sure I highlight exactly which phone I'm talking about here. This year, there's two A52s. There's a regular 4G LTE model, and then there's this A52 5G. That's the full name of the phone, and that's what you'll see in the online listings and right there on the box too. It's a totally different phone. And in fact, unlike last year, where the main difference between the A51s was the 5G support, this year the A52 5G has a number of additional features and specs that not only make it different, but also significantly better. That's the story with the A52 5G. That's the difference here. And actually right now, based on specs and features, this phone is the top tier A series device this year. It offers even more than the A72, which is kind of surprising. So that's already something to consider. Now, price-wise, while I think this device is still considered a mid-level or mid-range device, it's definitely at the upper end of that classification. Here in the US, it's going to retail for $499 unlocked direct from Samsung, and even for most networks and carriers too. The price is pretty much the same unless you're maybe a new customer. Around the world, it's still going to be a $450 to $500 device as well. It's certainly not cheap. And even though it's been out for a little bit now, prices don't seem to be coming down on this phone yet at all. Mainly because I think it is so popular and so good. Either way you look at it, while $500 is a decent chunk of change, it's far cheaper than the likes of the flagship S21 obviously, and even the S20 FE still, but at that $500 price, you are getting flagship caliber specs and features that I think make this phone well worth it. And if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own on all these Samsung devices, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to any and all deals and discounts that I have for you. Physically, the A52 5G is essentially identical to the handful of other A series devices we've already seen this year, and it actually now closely resembles most other Samsung smartphones. We get that familiar and consistent matte plastic rear cover now, which for me is held up nicely. I don't ever have a case on this phone, though I do wish I would have went with a more vibrant color. This white is nice, but with purple and blue options also available, I think those would have been a little more fun. Along the sides and edges, the polished metal frame now sports a flatter, boxier look, with the whole phone actually feeling a little thicker than before. And in the hand, it mimics more of an ice cream sandwich, I guess, than a sleek and slim tapered device like previous A-series phones have been, but I'm alright with that. It's a chunkier phone, but it fits nicely and there's plenty to grab onto, which I think I prefer. The only other thing worth noting is that this year the A52 5G gets an IP certification. It's water and dust resistant, which is great to finally have on these A-series phones, even at the IP67 distinction. It's just nice to know that it could survive an accidental splash if needed. What I think I like most about this phone though is just the fact that it's really missing nothing at all physically. Across the bottom, you still have a headphone jack if you like using that alongside the USB-C charging port. There's expandable storage up top as well, so even if you go with the 128 gig model like I have here, you can throw in an SD card and you're good to go. And my personal favorite new add-on for this year, dual speakers. There's one down below in the usual spot and the secondary one in the earpiece. The out loud listening experience is something I value quite highly, as you guys know, and this phone offers a great setup that I've really enjoyed using. Here's a sample so you can get an idea. All All in all, from top to bottom, this phone is missing out on almost nothing. Nothing has been taken away, you don't have to forfeit or compromise on anything. I guess if there is one thing, there's no wireless charging still on these A series phones, but I personally can look past that. You still get the charger and cable in the box after all, which is more than some other smartphones nowadays anyway. Before we get into the important stuff, just a couple other things I want to mention. With the biometrics, there's definitely been some improvements in unlocking speeds and consistency when it comes to the fingerprint sensor, though if you've used like an S20 FE or the S21, you can tell right away that this setup on the A52 5G doesn't quite compare. It's still a little slower at times. I still need to readjust my grip or re-tap my thumb from time to time, but even so, it's much better than the A51 last year. It's not quite flagship caliber, but it's one of just a few things on this phone that maybe misses the mark a little. Fortunately, with Face Unlock, that's also really pretty good as well. So either way you go, I think you can get into the phone fast enough. It's just not the best of the best. So really, the three main reasons why I think this phone is such a good value come down to the most important aspects of any smartphone, in my opinion: the display, the performance, and the camera. Let's start out with the display, and with this, there's really one big factor in play: 120 Hz. It was all of maybe a year and a half ago where a high refresh rate screen was only on the best of the best, the highest end, most expensive $1,200 flagship phones, and now you can get this fast, fluid, super smooth, and very responsive display experience on a device that's $500, and in some cases even cheaper than that. That's awesome, and to me, this is one of the standout features for this device overall. Now, yes, high refresh rate, whether it be 90 Hz or 120 Hz, has quickly become more and more common, so it shouldn't necessarily be a surprise, but it's still a nice addition, and something I think a lot of people will notice and appreciate. The phone just feels faster, it feels so much more responsive, and that I think is what most average, everyday folks will appreciate. Beyond that, just the regular old viewing experience is really quite good as well. The 6.5-inch display is a Super AMOLED panel coming in at a resolution of 2400 by 1080 that crams in some 407 pixels per inch, and from a normal viewing distance, you get a picture that's bold, colorful, and very bright. The display peaks at 800 nits of max brightness now, which is brighter than last year, and something I noticed right away. The overall viewing experience on these A series phones have always been a selling point, but unfortunately we have seen some compromises on the lower end A series devices this year for whatever reason, yet this A52 5G goes above and beyond when it comes to the screen, and I do consider that to be one of the top features for this phone. On the performance side of things, once again, while some other A series phones this year maybe didn't get the upgrades or spec boosts we were hoping for, I actually think this phone is spec'd just right, and in fact really packs a lot no matter what it is you want to do with your device. Inside, this phone is now powered by the relatively new Snapdragon 750G 5G chipset. You get a choice of either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM and 128 or 256 gigs of storage. Here are the Geekbench scores, so you can get kind of a value to sort of compare if you're interested. But in general, day-to-day use with this phone has been phenomenal performance-wise. I think right off the bat that Samsung's One UI has really shined this year. A couple software updates have already improved performance and camera capabilities on this phone, and paired with a high refresh rate display, this is a phone, like I said, that just feels very fast with all your average everyday app interactions. I've personally had no real issues, and in fact, this has easily been one of the best performing Android devices I've had this year. Pushing it a bit harder with gaming, I've also had no issues here either, and in fact, I might argue that this device will perform as good as any $1,000 phone you stack it up against, besides maybe a fraction of a second difference in initial app load times. Mainly on the performance side, my biggest thing here is just the fact that while sure it's not technically a flagship caliber spec, the price you might pay for a 2021 flagship phone can be significantly more than the actual performance boost you wind up getting. There's some serious diminishing marginal returns here, especially nowadays where I feel like I can't even pretend to find the difference between the speed of last year's flagships and this year's. All in all, this phone is a powerhouse in one sense, but also a crazy good value in another. It can handle anything and everything, it can still keep up with most any other device, but you're potentially saving a ton of money in the process. And Samsung has also put a huge focus on their A-series phones in recent years too, so you can expect at least a couple more years of software updates and support, which also makes this device a solid long-term investment now too. Something I said with last year's A series, which was true, but it's especially true now this year with this phone. Also, when it comes to battery life and longevity, while the 4500 mAh battery inside isn't exactly pushing the upper limits, there are plenty of other Samsung phones out there that have much bigger capacities, for example, I still think it's more than enough to power through the day. Now, I don't really think it's a full-on 2-day device for most people, simply because the combination of the more powerful specs and the high refresh rate display tend to suck down battery a bit more. But I do think it's a device that can afford you some 12 hours of screen on time, at least depending on how you use your phone. That's currently what I can get. And I know for me, that's more than enough to make it through the day and then some. So finally, let's talk about the camera setup. And you guys know that I think Samsung has probably put more effort into the shooting capabilities on these A series phones over the last couple of years than maybe anything else. And I think it's really paid off. Hardware-wise, the A52 5G has a 64 megapixel main lens and 12 megapixel ultra wide, both solid and useful so far. There's also that 5 megapixel macro lens for super up close pictures, which I don't really use, but it's there, and a 5 megapixel depth sensor as well. Now, if I had my say, I'd swap both of those out for a telephoto lens. We did get that on the A72, but collectively, there's nothing wrong with the whole package. And the front 32 megapixel selfie camera is pretty decent too. When it comes to the shooting modes and all the capabilities, not a single thing is missing here. And in fact, I think there's plenty to work with. But the actual results here are what we're most concerned about. And in my time using this phone, I think it's been really quite good to say the least. Now, I think the biggest improvements you'll see with the A52 5G versus previous A series phones include better low light photography for sure, including more usable night mode. There's more consistency with the wide angle as well versus the main lens. You don't get such a dark and very obviously different image in shooting the same scene with the wide angle anymore. And there's also been some slight improvements to skin tone with selfies in particular, though there's still maybe a little bit more here that can be done to make it great. Overall, this isn't going to be a flagship spec picture and video device, but the improvements year over year have now made the A52 5G a great device to shoot with that packs a ton of great features. And considering how quickly camera tech has evolved in general, it's probably the thing that's evolved most on smartphones this last year or two. I think this was a necessary transition to have the A52 really keep up. Samsung has had no choice but to improve the camera setups on these A series phones better and faster year over year, and their efforts, I think this year, have really paid off. So if you couldn't tell already, I really like the A52 5G. It's probably my favorite phone so far this year, and like I said, it's certainly the standout Samsung device for 2021 so far. I know the price isn't as nice as some other A series phones. $500 is expensive for a lot of people, I understand that, but this is a device with $1,000 flagship features, like that 120Hz display, and it performs as good as phones with the highest end 2021 flagship specs. Considering all you get here, the whole package, and comparing it to what you might get for a lot more money, I just can't pass this phone up. It's a great deal, all things considered. Packs everything you need and then some, and it's the epitome of value right now in Samsung's lineup, at least until a rumored S21 FE comes out, if we happen to see that. So there you go, those are all my thoughts on the A52 5G. What do you guys think about this device? If you have it, let me know your experience with it so far in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.